Good evening. My name is Sean Bevan. Yeah, I'm the treasurer here. I've been here for about 2 years. My favorite Mesa moment so far was watching homecoming in this very large commons 2 years ago. So it was quite an experience, and I was glad to be able to be a part of that. This next part of our agenda, if you have not heard of school financial forecast, twice a year we're required to submit a financial forecast to the state of Ohio, once in May and once in October. So this is our October version we're going to be looking at tonight. And really this is the culmination of a lot of hard work from the board and from the administrative team really over the last month. Really the process starts in the finance committee. There's a deep dive in the finance committee to go through all the assumptions in the forecast. From that point then it goes on to a full board work session where the entire board has a chance to look through it. And then this next meeting tonight where we actually go through and approve that. So there's a lot of work that goes into this. And if at any point you guys have questions or want to dive deeper into the forecast, you can always feel free to call me, email me. I'd be happy to talk through it more with you or meet with you sometime. So in tonight's presentation, we just have a few things we'll go through. We'll look at kind of the significant assumptions in the forecast. Anytime you're doing a financial forecast, really what drives those numbers are the assumptions that you use. And so we'll take a look at those both on the revenue side and the expense side. And then we'll take a look, just kind of an overall quick snapshot of where the district's at right now. If we start on the revenue side of the ledger, we have a couple main sources of revenue in our operating fund. Local property taxes is more than half of where we get our revenue sources from. The biggest variables there are really future reappraisals or new construction. You might know this, but every 3 years a county auditor goes around the county and reassesses the property valuation in the district. So that's one variable, and the big variable is new construction. The other big source for us is state foundation revenues. The state of Ohio funds us based on the number of kids we have. We could spend a long time talking about that in detail, but in general, we do get a big source of our funding from them. So about 87% of our funding this year will come from those two sources. The next slide will be a graph just showing a picture view of what those main revenue sources are. Again, more than half coming from local property taxes and about 33% coming from the state. The next slide is going to be what makes up our local property taxes. About 83% of our local revenues come from homes. And so we do have a good commercial base, but obviously the vast majority of our local property tax revenue is coming from residential property owners. Moving over to the expense side, just in terms of big ticket items, being a personnel and service business, the biggest portion of our budget does come from salaries and benefits. So about 85% of our operating budget is spent on people. And so the next biggest part of that are the expense side is on purchase services. That includes things like special ed and other educational services, utilities. Those are some of the big items in that purchase services category. The next slide is just going to be a picture view of that. Again, 85% going to be salaries and benefits. And we'll take a high-level look at the revenue assumptions before we move on to a little bit more detail on each of those lines. Again, on the property taxes, 54% of our local revenues, our total revenues coming from property taxes this year. Again, the two main variables I mentioned were new construction and reappraisals. About 1.7% is our current estimate on new construction. The reason that's significant is we do get a slight amount of new money from new construction. We could spend a long time talking about school funding and local property taxes, but one interesting fact, we do get some questions sometimes saying, well, if you see a lot of new construction in the district, doesn't that mean you're getting a lot of new revenue? And it really doesn't. We do get a small amount of new revenue from that, but an interesting fact is it takes $1 million home to generate enough revenue to cover one new student in our district. So it does help, but it doesn't go all the distance in funding those new students. In terms of state foundation, the state has put our district on the state funding guarantee, which basically means that we're flat funded and we anticipate being flat funded for a number of years into the future. On the revenue side, the next biggest piece we have is what we call property tax allocation. You may or may not have heard or seen or read something called tangible personal property tax in the state of Ohio. Over the years, this was a significant funding source for the district. Our high water mark in this line was about $11 million several years ago, and we're down to about $300,000 this year, and next year that will be completely eliminated. So this is part of the state's effort to attract new business several years ago. So overall, you can debate on whether or not it was a success at the state level, but at the local level, it did come at a significant cost to the school district. Other revenues, about 6% of our total revenues this year are significant factors in there: student fees, interest income, Medicaid reimbursements. So with interest income being a big factor, obviously, a big variable there is interest rates. And so you've seen interest rates go up and down here over the recent past, and so we'll continue to watch those into the future. Other revenues, about 6% of our total revenues this year are significant factors in there: student fees, interest income, Medicaid reimbursements. So with interest income being a big factor, obviously, a big variable there is interest rates. And so you've seen interest rates go up and down here over the recent past, and so we'll continue to watch those into the future. Moving over to the expense side, as I mentioned, being a service business, about 85% of our budget comes from people. So the district employs over 1,100 staff. So the biggest sources of our drivers of our assumptions here are going to be staffing levels and our negotiated agreements that we work through with our teachers and our support staff unions. On the fringe benefit side, about 24% of our budget. Medical expenses are one big piece of that. Retirement there's another big piece of that. So again, the biggest drivers of that are going to be the number of staff we have and what kind of health insurance plans we have there. Moving over to purchase services, again, I mentioned earlier, special ed was a big cost here. If you look at total student services, not just special ed, but some tuition costs we have our students going other places, almost $5 million this year. So special ed, student services, electric, utilities, maintenance, repairs, those kinds of things are what drive our purchase services costs. Supplies and materials, about 3%. So you're talking about bus fuel, classroom supplies, cleaning supplies. Those are the drivers on that line. Capital outlay, this line, we really don't have very much in. We have a separate fund. Tonight we're talking about the general fund. We have a separate fund called Permanent Improvement Fund, and we do spend most of our capital expenditures through that fund. So there's really not much to account for in the general fund here. Other items, our biggest source in other items on the expenditure side is about $700,000 that the county collects for collecting our property tax for us. So that's our biggest expense there. If we flip ahead, I want to take a brief minute and just kind of look historically and just kind of overall big picture. If you look back over the last 25 years, you can see up here on the slide the operating tax levies that have been passed in the district all the way back to 1996, 2001, and 2005. So you can see there was a window of about a 10-year period there. We were passing a levy about every 4 to 5 years. We are currently at about 14 years since we passed our last levy. And so it's been quite a distance there in time. We've been pretty fortunate through a lot of different circumstances. You can see on here the typical levy cycle in Ohio is about 3 to 5 years. But following the 2010 levy defeat, the board and team made a strategic decision to change the cost structure of the district. And so you'll see up here a list of things that were done that really helped stave off that next need for a levy and it's pushed that out several more years. If you flip to the next slide, sorry to turn my back to you here for a minute. You can see this little curve right here going down on the graph. That yellow line is our cash balance. So back at following that levy defeat, this is when that new cost structure was put into place. Without that new cost structure, you would have seen that line continue to go down, much like this line is. But because of that, we were able to stave off that need for the next levy. However, those cost restructures have lasted for a few years. We're kind of entering a new season now where you see us at this point where our expenses are exceeding our revenues and we're eating into that cash balance again.
Can you say what the dates are? I'm sorry, I can't see
Yeah, sure.
any of those dates. Can you say when it goes negative?
You go back to that. This one right here. Talk about negative cash balance or negative profit and loss?
2019. She wants a
Cash balance. Right here in 22.
Thank you.
Sure. If you go on to the next slide, as I mentioned, with about 87% of our revenues come from either local property taxes or state funding. Put a couple pieces of information up here about those two sources. When it comes to state funding, there's a measure that the state puts out called state funding per student. If you look up here, going back to 2009, our state funding per student was about $4,273. If you fast forward to fiscal year 18, $4,366. So you can do the math on that. We're at about 0.2% increase per year in state funding. And again, we don't have much control over that, really very little to no control over that. We can lobby, we can make efforts at the state level to change that, but really we kind of get what the state gives us. And so very little increase from the state over the last 10 years. If you look at the local property tax effective millage rate, this millage rate is what the county auditor uses to determine how much tax a homeowner is going to pay on their house. You can go all the way back to 1978, and at that time the effective tax rate on homes was 29.98 mils. Fast forward to today, the effective millage rate is 31.25 mils. And if you recall, just a couple of slides ago, we looked at several levies that have been passed in the last 25 years. It's a really interesting fact, but something called House Bill 920 is what erodes that tax rate over the years. And so because that tax rate erodes over the years, that's why you see the tax rate being almost the same now as it was back in 1978. Flip to the next slide. Overall, you might have heard of something called the niche survey. It's a measurement in the state of Ohio on really across the country on rankings for school districts. Mason continues to deliver a high quality educational experience, number 5 in the state of Ohio right now. With a cost that's actually below the state average. So it's something that we work really hard at, the board works really hard at. Achieving that number 5 ranking at a cost below state average is something that's really important to this board, to this district. When you look at the future, we have our anticipated revenues expected to increase by less than 1% per year. And as we have costs just grow as part of our normal operating expenses in our budget. You did see the graph up there showing that our cash balance is going negative, and so at some point here in the near future, we are going to need some kind of new revenue to help stabilize our funds and put us in a healthy cash position going forward for the future. Questions from the board? I know you guys have seen this lots of times, so that basically covers our general operating fund. Just for anybody in the audience who does not know, we have several different funds we operate from. The general operating fund is our primary one. We have some other funds, health insurance funds, capital improvement funds, but this forecast really covers that general operating fund. And we have updated our other forecasts as well. We don't submit those to the Department of Education, but those have also been updated.